listeners, and welcome to Pop Screen, the podcast that's cooler than being cool. We are that corner of the geek show that likes to look at the good, the bad, and the bewildering of movies either starring, about, or by pop stars. No, the podcast covers a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from documentaries to science fiction, from country and western to hip-hop. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a filmmaker who writes for the Geek Show, We Are Cult, and Byline Times. And I've been joined this week by...
Hi, I'm Joe Millar. I'm part of the Geek Show. I work on the animation podcast for the Geek Show, Dreaming Machine. But I'm a big OutKast fan, hence why I'm here, joining Graham on his excellent podcast.
Indeed, yes, you've revealed who we're doing, and when we say OutKast, it can only be one film, right? There's a voluminous amount of OutKast-related cinema. We could have done a lot of Andre Benjamin's work as an actor in everything from the Jimi Hendrix biopic, All This By My Side, to High Life, Claire Denis' Space Jizz movie. But we have chose I think it is the one film where they're together, isn't it?
I can't get over the fact that's how you described High Life, by the way. But let's continue.
I described it like that so frequently that our mutual friend Ollie was worried he was going to go to the cinema and actually ask for a ticket to Claire Denis' Space Jizz movie.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, he didn't, because that would have been pretty funny.
But that's how it will forever now be known.
Absolutely.
Because
yes.
we totally digress, though, don't we? Yes, Idlewild.
Idlewild.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware, it's the only movie they're both in. That's correct.
And it came out at a point where you would think an OutKast movie would be easy money, right?
Yeah, it was the first big thing they did after the absolute monster Speaker Box The Love Below.
Yeah.
Massive selling album, like massive singles, massive cultural impact. Yet, I'll let you carry on with the backstory. Yeah.
And yet this film basically tanked, didn't it? It cost 10 million and made 12.6 million, but also, I mean, we've done a lot of films that have not made money on this show, but are still well remembered. But this just seems to have vanished from people's memories, which is the thing that I find most extraordinary.
It's bizarre, isn't it? And no one ever
Yeah,
talks about this. Yeah.
no, absolutely not. Even though its soundtrack album is, as we go to press, the last OutKast album.
Who would have thunk it at the time?
Absolutely no one, no. But we should talk a bit before we get into it about how important OutKast were. Though I feel like, unlike this film, their reputation has only really grown with
Yeah.
every year that they are dormant.
I mean, there's so much you could say about them. It's kind of hard to know where to start. I mean, they've been called the Lennon and McCartney of hip hop, like the kind of dynamic they had.
Mm,
The player and the poet, like kind of cliche, like massively simplistic generalization, but it's quite a nice way to think about it too at the same time.
yes.
And also putting like southern hip hop on the map as well, like in the mainstream.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's very hard to think back to a time when Southern rap wasn't recognised as a major cultural force, but when they started out in the mid-90s, hip hop was basically coastal. It was an entirely coastal affair.
Yeah, and you had like other groups as well, like Goody Mob and stuff like that. But like they were like the biggest ones definitely, and they really
Mm,
broke through. And then and so they did a series like incredible, critically acclaimed albums. With amazing songs, and they kept progressing as a band and changing to the point
mm,
where Speaker Box The Love Below was. I mean, that came from I read that came from Andre 3000 wanting to do a solo album, just
yeah.
totally break off. Like, and now this was at the height of their success, right after Sankonia,
Mm.
which gave them like Miss Jackson, like arguably the first like really big UK.
Yeah, I remembered Stankonia being the one that launched them in the UK, although I wasn't sure whether it was just because it was the first one that like I was aware of. But yes, I think you're right.
Yeah, and when we look back at Aquemini, has a lot, maybe gets more critical plaudits, arguably, or it's like
Yeah.
very close run thing with Sankonia. But I agree. I think that was the biggest one in the UK. And then at the height of that success internationally, they break off to do Andre 3000 wants to do his own solo album. The
Mm,
OutKast management and Big Boy think that's a really bad idea.
yeah.
They work out a compromise solution. They're doing two solo albums and packaging it together as OutKast. And so you just had the spirit of like constantly changing and doing new things and constantly developing, like all led by them. And they've
Mm,
been like the lead writers and producers. And if you look at it in production credits, I think it says Earth Tone 3, but like as the main producers, so that's basically their pseudonym for like them producing themselves, and the music styles and production is so advanced and kept changing. So yeah, it's even though that like the biggest hits like Hey Ya came out of that album, it was like a big risk to do two solo albums and not just keeping
yeah.
the same vibe of what they were doing before.
Absolutely, yeah. And I listened to Speaker Box The Love Below again in preparation for this podcast, and this is going to be a pretty continual refrain when we're talking about Outcast, but I just feel awful for Big Boy, man. His record is so good, but
The
it's
speaker
not,
box,
yeah, it's brilliant,
yeah.
but it's not completely insane like The Love Below, so it gets overlooked. It doesn't include one of the biggest singles of the 2000s, so,
I think any album like, almost in history would be overlooked next to The Love Below. I mean, the third track into that a conversation with God,
yeah,
where Andre is just discussing like his relationship troubles and confirms that God's a woman, just so everyone's aware.
yes,
Um, and then it's got a weird like skit in the middle, and it just goes all over the place. It's almost like a concept as well, like a story of what's happening to him. Like lots of relationships thrown in as part of that, of course. But and the music, you jump into this like very heavily Prince influenced,
mm,
like amazing funk and strings and all the kinds of things being thrown in from the start. I think almost anything would be overwhelmed by that. But as you say, Speaker Box is great.
mm.
How can the song that starts off, how can an album that starts with like ghetto music be overshadowed when it's like
Ghetto
three songs
music
in
is
one and there's all these tricks
incredible.
going on and craziness. There's some great, great songs on there like Bow Tie and Unhappy's brilliant. Like
Yeah,
no one ever
agree.
remembers that one. And Church is great.
Yeah,
Um,
War.
some of which appears in the movie we'll be talking
Yeah,
about, of course. Yeah. So no, you're right. And there is a lot of the critical notices, to be fair, like do comment that Speaker Box is unfairly overlooked, and there has been like
yeah,
praise for that record too. And I think
yeah.
the way you moved it quite well in the singles chart,
Mm,
like so, hey, I didn't totally take
wipe it
all the
out.
glory away.
Yeah,
Like that song and Roses, which has a Big Boy verse in it as well, did really well.
yeah. Um, but it's true that the Love Below is just this fantastically ambitious thing, and I think you can tell the difference by looking at the guest spots where like Speakerbox has a lot of great collaborators on it, but they're people like Killer Mike and Sleepy Brown, who Outkast had always worked with. And The Love Below has the actress Rosario Dawson on it. So yeah, it's definitely going a bit broader with its
Yeah,
influences.
yeah, no, for sure. And you also, if you look at like, is it Flip Flop Rock or something like on like
Mm.
near the end of Speaker Box? I mean, just hip hop royalty like in a row. It's amazing.
It,
Um,
it it also
but
comes, doesn't it? It comes at a time which I don't think it would be unfair to characterize as the low point of hip hop in the around the sort of early noughties when a lot of the guiding lights of the 90s scene are dead. They've been replaced by people like 50 Cent who are just devoid of all inspiration. There's a whole load of novelty singles that just seem designed to sell ringtones, and suddenly you've got this mad funk influenced double album, which is like nothing else. So yeah, a band who both defined and transcended their time. And what would you say the thinking behind Idlewild is as a project? How would you like encapsulate the sort of vision?
That's a great question. And I think in like hundreds of years' time, people will still be theorizing about this. And I think well, it's a strange. I mean, I came to it first via the album, so I
Yeah,
listened to the album first before I saw the movie.
as did I.
And yeah, and the album is a really weird thing, because
Mm,
half of it is almost the first half almost is kind of more hip hop focused and more what you'd expect from them historically, and
yeah.
then the other half is it really goes into the film's vibe of this like speakeasy era and like the 30s America and all that kind of and very and jazzy and swing and all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of and the kind of lyrical matter is really weird as well. I remember Hollywood divorces that that thing we can all empathize with. Not being treated as a serious actor in Hollywood. Yeah, I
Yes.
totally empathize with that one, Trey. The album's a really weird thing. Um, I think the film itself, though, and the whole concept was them thinking, well, we've proven we can do what we want. We've achieved all this great success with everything we've tried.
Yeah.
Um, the Love Below especially shows Andre 3000 wanting to branch out and do different things.
Mm,
You saw that through the whole decade. Like you did an animation series, like as well. Like so, you wanted to like, branch out and do different things. And he had a couple of other film credits around the same time. So it just it made sense for them to do a movie in general to start with,
yeah.
let's say, and then like they worked with the like frequent collaborator Brian Barber to like work out exactly what that movie would be.
Mm,
And then yeah, and the film more successfully than the album like goes for a specific vibe where it's as I say it's 30s America, but they can still throw in modern hip hop elements and dance moves and things like that.
yes, the exact comparison that came to mind when we watched this was, what if Baz Luhrmann was good?
You're not a Baz Luhrmann fan.
Hate the guy, but it's got that same kind of using anachronisms to draw comparisons between different eras, because this is set in the Prohibition era. At one point,
Yeah,
someone basically says the subtext and points at a bottle of liquor and says this shit sells like cannabis. So, in a strange way, this is the closest OutKast have ever come to doing what was expected of rappers back then and telling a gangster story. It's just gangsters in the
yeah. You can. It
1920s.
is a gangster story, isn't it? I
Yeah.
think that's a fair comment. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, and so that I mean that works quite well to be fair. Um, and as I say, the film's more successful than the album and having that certain like like vibe to it, as I said. Um, but it's still weird because they have like songs from like 3 different albums on there,
Yeah, that's the strange
and
thing. Having crafted, as you say, this thing where there's a load of songs that have this very specific remit of, let's take 1920s music and do a hip hop spin on it. Basically, none of that is in the film. There's a load of stuff on the album like Mighty
yeah,
O and Morris Brown, which were, I mean, they weren't Hey Ya size hits, but they were moderate radio hits in the day,
yeah.
that are not in the movie at all, which is really weird, I think.
And even weirder, there's some movies that even more closely or like period pieces, that have
Mm,
that jazzy like big band vibe to it that
yeah,
aren't in the movie either.
yeah,
That would
yeah.
perfectly go with it. And so not just the hip hop songs, but some of the songs later on in the album would perfectly go in, and they got dropped too.
And
So
and I,
it's weird.
I
Yeah,
suppose on one level I can kind of understand it because I think one of the running problems that movies that pop musicals specifically have is that you know when people pay a ticket to see a movie with a band in, they often want the hits. It's like going to a concert. You want to hear the songs you love. You feel a bit sort of disappointed when they say, "Okay, we just worked this one up." Well, I don't actually, but that's the cliche.
I
Um,
don't either actually, but a lot of
yeah,
people do. I
yeah,
understand what you're saying.
and that's why the pop musicals that work are the ones like Mamma Mia. I mean, work in a commercial sense are the ones like Mamma Mia, which have all of the hits of ABBA that you want to hear, and the ones that don't, things like True Stories, despite True Stories being an absolutely brilliant movie, but
Yeah,
David Byrne wrote a whole new album to accompany that film, and everyone was like, "Oh, so it's not got Once in a Lifetime on it," and I understand that maybe they were trying to avoid being true stories by putting in songs from particularly from Speakerbox The Love Below, but even then the selection of songs from Speakerbox The Love Below is really weird from that perspective, isn't it? They make some odd
yeah, it is
choices.
weird, and I think it maybe goes with that vibe of we can do what we want and we're choosing to.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
so,
maybe.
I think that might be part of it. Um, and so they can go for. I'm not sure if they're deep cuts, but the songs that weren't like the obvious singles from those other albums that weren't designed for this movie.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I did sort of wonder, and maybe I think this is probably being unfair, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Maybe people around the band were thinking, okay, Speakerbox, that's going to be a massive hit. It's full of great club tracks. The Love Below, maybe people will get into it. Who knows? Anyway, that doesn't matter because we have front loaded this movie with all the classic bangers from Speakerbox that everyone loves, and what do you mean Bowtie wasn't even a single? What the shit's going on?
maybe. I mean, it's hard to tell, isn't it?
Yeah,
Because not all that kind of like background label stuff has been reported, and they did recognize Hey Ya's potential because that was the lead single.
yeah.
So
It's
like,
not in this movie though.
true, true.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so it's kind of hard to tell that history of it. I mean, I do. It does seem like. I mean, obviously there would be producers, but they get like producer credits as well, like the
mm.
like OutKast themselves, and the directors worked with them on lots of previous music videos. HBO as a studio, I don't think has a massive reputation for interfering in like artists' work and that kind of thing.
This is
So
true.
I
Yeah,
and the amount of weird things in it, like the bottle with a rooster on who randomly talks to him with no prior explanation, things like that suggests to me that they had a relatively free hand in what they chose to do.
yeah. I think that's probably true, and I think it's at the budget level where people probably felt comfortable saying, no one's going to lose their shirt on this. Because 10
Yeah,
million for a period piece is not expensive.
yeah, and there's quite a lot of there's a lot of big set pieces and
Yeah,
like effects work and things like that. So it and different sets and things. So it really it looks great actually. For I was surprised the budget was that little when I read
yeah.
about it as part of the research. Yeah,
So it starts off, doesn't it, in classic gangster movie style with this voiceover which fills you in on the lead characters, Rooster and what's Andre 3000's character called? Patrice or something, is it? Percival, yes. Rooster and,
yeah,
and Percival. Yeah, Percival,
yeah.
apparently.
It's P. One of the song titles is PJ and Rooster. But so I'm surprised they don't just use the abbreviated name PJ during it. But yeah,
Yeah.
first of all,
Named after their main musical influence, PJ and Duncan, of course.
oh, of course, everyone's favorite influence. It's a very strong opening. I think the narration just throws you straight in. You're like into the two main characters, and it's got a very snappy like direction to it, and you're instantly sucked into the story. I think the opening works quite well. Even it does go on a while, admittedly, but it does work quite well, I'd say.
I like how it lays out the story. I think the only problem I have with it is that Andre 3000 sounds like Harrison Ford level bored when he's reading it out. But it is kind of nice to know that there is one thing in the world that Andre Benjamin isn't brilliant at. And it turns out it's reading voiceover. That's it. Everything else, he's a fucking prodigy.
No, nobody's perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, when I first saw it, I thought he was maybe a bit too. I'm not sure if laid back's the right term, but like not a bit too like monotone and
Yeah.
like in general. Like, when I rewatched it, I think his acting performance was better than they gave it credit for, and he works
Yeah.
quite well.
Yeah. I
Um,
would agree.
but yeah, I get what you're saying with his narration, though, for sure.
I think they're
You know,
both
you have
very
to be into it, or why should we be into it if you're not into
yeah.
it?
I think acting wise, they're both very good in it. And I was expecting, I think again from, there is this perception based partly on their work and partly on that one Key and Peele sketch that Big Boy just sort of sits in his chair and suffers while Andre 3000 has a series of madder and madder ideas, and that's Outcast's dynamic. But of course, that's not true. And I was expecting Big Boy to be less engaged because he's been less interested in acting since. This. It doesn't seem to be a passion of his like it is for Andre, but he's good in it too, I think.
I think he's brilliant in it. I was really
Yeah.
impressed by his performance. It made me think he should act in more things. He
I
just does
mean,
that
I
character really well, and his comic timing and his the way he interacts with the characters works really well. I was really impressed by him.
yeah, I
Um,
agree.
and yeah, I think there's more to the dynamic than sometimes like it's captured in the media. Like, I read an interview where Big Boy releases a solo album,
Mm,
and he said the like the single as the lead single that was a massive hit in the US and was Andre 3000's suggestion for like what the lead single should be. So he said, "Oh, so I own one for saying that." So the fact that they were just chatting as friends in the background, even though they've seemingly gone on wildly different paths,
yeah.
and I'm sure like Big Boy would love to do more Outcast stuff with him, but like they still got a friendship there, and they still got a healthy respect for each other. Um, so it doesn't surprise me so much that he would be into the movie and like committed to it, even if Andre
Mm.
it was his mad idea originally or something.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And it's good that they hold their own because they have an absolutely stacked cast in this. I mean, there are some amazing actors in this, and Terrence Howard. There's Cicely Tyson, Ving Rhames, Bill Nunn, Paula Patton. It's a really good cast.
I just love that Terrence Howard did. That was really well
I
done, Graham.
just, I think we should address this because that was the first thing I said after it finishes. This is one of a string of movies made in the mid to late noughties that tried to persuade us that Terrence Howard was intimidating, and he still looks like a guy who you could basically knock over with a sneeze. I just do not get
Yeah,
it at
yeah.
all.
He kind of has this pouty teenager vibe at the start as well. That's his like, performance. Yeah, the cast is amazing. It's amazing
Yeah.
who they got in. I was very impressed by that. Although there were huge stars, especially at the time, so I can kind of see why they got those people in. But once
Oh,
again, that's
absolutely.
partly why I thought the budget would be higher for the movie.
Yeah. No,
And
definitely.
there's some great performances. I think the only disappointment for me was the female representation, like both in terms of the lack of any like major female characters driving anything in the story, um, and like the lack of anything to do really. Like Macy Gray does great with her like small bits in the movie,
Mm.
and she's like a treat to watch. But I just felt in general like the female roles were underwritten. They could have done more of that. But putting that aside, like I still think the cast is great and the characters are really good.
Yeah, I think my main problem with the female roles, it's one of those things that I would never have known about if it wasn't for like black people actually opening my eyes to it. And once they do, you can't unsee it. Is that all of the women who were meant to be desirable are light skinned, and all of the women who were meant to be like comic relief or matronly or otherwise sexless are dark skinned. And boy, once someone opens your eyes to that, it does really smack you in the face. But I I did like Paula Patton's performance in this, and I thought she had a pretty generous role. I think if maybe if more people had seen this, it would have been because she's always someone who's had a career
Mm,
that's been very close to being big quite a lot of times, and
yeah,
it's never quite clicked, which is a shame.
yeah, yeah. You're right. She's really good in it actually, and she has a bit
Mm.
more to do. I
Because
still
she,
think she can maybe add more to do beyond that, to be
yeah, I
honest, in
think,
the scripts.
yeah,
But yeah, I take your point though.
because there's a nice little gag buried in it where she initially presents herself as a famous singer who they've booked to play at their speakeasy. And for a while, she is getting the full-on Star is Born narrative arc. There's a great, how great is that scene where she has to win over the audience, and there's just that one asshole whose voice is mixed higher than everyone else, going, "Ah, God, she's doing it again!" Like a sort of one-person Statler and Waldorf from the Muppets.
That was great, wasn't it? That scene, yeah.
Yeah,
Um, because it did that like thing of like they struggle at the start with the performance like that, but they did it in a
yeah,
really funny way that you didn't
yeah,
mind if
absolutely.
that scene's been done before. Like it's really funny and clever, and you did feel like in their shoes on stage,
Mm.
like to like a baying crowd. Yeah,
But then it's quite clever that she's revealed to be an imposter. She's just pretending to be this famous singer that they booked. The famous singer that they booked turns up, and it's Patti LaBelle, which I just think is a great casting gag. That as soon as
yeah,
Patti LaBelle turns up, you think, "Oh, of course you're the famous singer because you're a famous singer."
yeah, exactly. Um, I mean, the only thing, yes, it was cleverish. I swear it's a plot of Calamity Jane or something. Wasn't there
Yeah,
another movie
probably.
that did the same kind of thing?
There's a lot of great imposter stories, isn't there? It's a trope that I'm always quite fond of, so I was happy to see it turn up here. It's very
I mean, when
Principal
yeah,
Seymour Skinner, I think.
uh, Armin Tanzarian, you mean?
Yeah, well, we can't mention that on pain of torture, but yes.
No, you can't. Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, that was fun. That was kind of fun, and there was an actual. I mean, what I liked about it compared to other like, it sounds really vanity projects. Let's say musical
Yeah,
vanity
yeah,
projects, of which you specialize so well in your podcast.
yes.
It had an actual plot,
Hmm.
and it had like characters who were flawed, which I know shouldn't be a big deal, but it kind of is compared to a lot of other like films I've seen.
I think that's very true. Yeah,
The two leads have like Andre 3000 and Big Boy's characters have like massive flaws. Like the latter's a womanizer and partying instead of being with his family.
yeah,
Um, and there's and Andre 3000, his Percival is lacks confidence, like just knuckles down, doesn't like stand up for himself or take chances.
mm,
It's just refreshing like that they had like those flawed characters throughout the majority of the movie rather than being these perfect people we had to idolize.
yeah. Although it's one of those things, isn't it? When as soon as Andre 3000 turns on the charisma, it's impossible to buy him as a flawed character. Like you just look at that
True.
guy and think you're a megastar, obviously.
Yeah, yeah, true. um
But that's not a bad
I,
thing.
I
I don't mind
I
that.
kind of gave it a pass on that. Yeah, you're right,
Yeah,
like objectively yes, true, but because the music scenes were so good, I was like,
yeah.
oh, it's fine. I, I'll
The,
go with it.
I mean, the music scenes are all good, but I think the one over the end credits is just if musical cinema was in a healthier state than it
Mm.
is right now, someone would have cast that guy in like a big mainstream Hollywood musical because that is absolutely classic showmanship. That is absolute Broadway shit.
Yeah, for sure. And it's kind of weirdly like some of the reviews I read said that the tone, the movie had the tone was inconsistent, and I disagree
Mm.
with that. I think the tone's fine. Um, I think the pacing's a bit weird. So
Yeah,
they have these great musical numbers like near the start after the intro. Then we have 20 minutes of plot, a really, really
yeah,
intense plot, and then at the end, the very very end, we have two amazing musical numbers in a row that are just
yeah.
like bolted on the end. They're great. I totally agree with you, but just like so, I think the only so I think the tone works quite well actually, and like it's meant to be anachronistic. That's fine. Like
Oh
the
yeah, yeah.
Outcast, let them do whatever music they want. That's great. So I just think the pacing was a bit weird, like when those musical numbers came in, maybe, and sometimes
Mm.
they did quite well trying to integrate them into the plot. To be fair,
Yeah,
um, but is like with variable results.
I think as musicals have become less of a regular kind of cinematic thing, people miss that musicals have a very precise structure. You can't just put a bunch of songs in a story and expect it to work as a musical. There are very specific reasons why songs have to come in. There's a certain kind of shape to a musical that is satisfying. I think out of all of the recent movie musicals, and obviously discounting something like Spielberg's West Side Story, where, yes, of course, that gets it right. It's West Side Story. How could it not? But I think, in terms of like new movie musicals, the one that's nailed that structure the best is actually Annette,
Mm.
which is strange because on the surface, that film is so unconventional, but once you dig into it, it's really clear that Ron and Russell Mael absolutely love musicals and know how to lay out the songs and bring recurring motifs back in at a certain point.
Well, but I've not seen that particular movie, but I do take your general point though,
Mm,
about like there's a good and a bad way of doing it, and it's
yeah,
more complicated than people think. Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. I think my main problem with it is just the gangster stuff is not as compelling as what's around it. And I don't know whether I'd be singing a different tune if they had an actor who I rated more than Terrence Howard in the in the role of Trumpy, which is a very strange name to be thinking about in 2022, isn't it? That
Yes.
has a whole different resonance than it did back in 2006.
Yeah, for sure.
But I
Sadly.
just thought
Yeah.
I could have happily gone for a musical hangout set entirely at the Speakeasy, where the only sort of point of jeopardy is Paula Patton's character, and is she going to be found out as an imposter? I think that would be a much better film, in my opinion.
Maybe. Yeah. I kind of respected the film though for having these like two plots,
Mm,
um, and actually like they barely interact with each other at all.
yeah.
The Outcast duo's main characters are very separate still throughout a lot of the movie. And I quite admired the ambition to like have those two plots and like cut between them.
Mm,
The gangster stuff wasn't as compelling. I think you're right. It could have done more. It wasn't a very political film either, generally, with the odd exception, or at least not overtly or directly. Um, and there's a lot of stuff you could maybe have done with that era and prohibition and things like that. I don't know. I mean, not every film has to do that, to be fair. But it
I
just,
think it's sort of
yeah, they could maybe have done more of that side of it.
it's there in the subtext. I think drawing a parallel between like hip hop and its association, particularly strongly at that point with gangster narratives and the history of gangsterism in America, and using prohibition is like daring the audience to make the connection between prohibition then and prohibition now and how that fuels so
Yeah,
much crime. I also think there's something interesting about making a film about like these historic black communities because there's been there was so much of an effort to erase them from history. And I like the idea that Idlewild, the town in Georgia, which is a fictional town, um, although this history is so underexplored in the media that I did have to
Mm.
look up whether it was real or not. But I like the implication that it's kind of the consolation prize Harlem. That if you can't go to Harlem and be with, Langston Hughes and Billie Holiday and all of the great black intelligentsia of this era, you sort of go to Idlewild and it's kind of the same, but it's not really.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. Like, I think I use the word like over direct political
Mm,
comment in the script and things, but you're right. There are some other layers to it just by the nature of the setting.
yeah.
Um, yeah, for sure.
And it's interesting because when I was listening again to Speakerbox The Love Below, it did remind me that OutKast were one of the few mainstream bands of the early Bush era who did do political stuff. Like most people just got
Mm.
shit scared of that by 9/11. And there was I remember there was a great Guardian review of an album that Marilyn Manson released back then, which I thought was funny then and is funnier now because he's a fucking rapist and fuck that guy. Um, but it said he seems very eager to find ways to shock the listener. And at the moment, you think, have you considered making a mildly worded criticism of American foreign policy? Because that really
Mm.
seems to do the trick at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what's great is one of the songs they did include from the Idlewild album was like a gorgeous like gospel number, which has some of the lyrics are about like soldiers fighting abroad and things like that, and
Yeah,
it's a beautiful, really powerful number. It's just a shame that because of the lack of attention the film and the soundtrack got in relative terms, like things like that didn't like have as much attention as they deserved, really.
yeah, I think so. It does have some fantastic songs. Isn't Janelle Monáe on one of those songs on Idlewild?
Yeah, she is, and she features in the video for the Morris Brown single launched
Oh,
this era as well, and served as an advert for the movie.
oh, I'll have to rewatch that. I
So
haven't
yeah,
seen the Morris
it's a great
Brown.
way of bringing her into public consciousness for sure.
Hmm. Yes, but yeah, the whole Trumpy thing just never took off. I can't believe they called him Trumpy. Like even before, that's not a good name for a gangster, man. I I, I just
Yeah, he had this kind of like whiny tone, didn't he? And like he wasn't very intimidating, as you say. And his name was Trump. You can't really take people that seriously with that name. They're trying to be an intimidating gangster, I guess.
no, I would agree. Yeah. Um, but it's worth going back to, isn't it? We would agree on that.
Well, yeah, the film in
The
general,
film,
yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah,
I mean, and the kind of I think I said to you another time in terms of the album in that era.
mm,
I have a weird soft spot for like career ending, like a
yeah,
messy late era albums and eras and things where they're often like, even though like the album's extremely messy and the film
mm,
didn't like have the impact it was meant to, but like, I just love the ambition and these two really incredibly talented, strong personalities just doing their own thing and like going out. It's really like fun to watch. It's like,
mm,
yeah, if we're gonna do this kind of like movie, we're gonna really do it. We're gonna have like dance numbers and like this
yes,
amazing cast, and like we're gonna have this really ambitious, doesn't quite gel plot, like all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I think the ambition of it and the quality of the music and most of the acting means that
mm.
it's really easy to return to, and you know it's due that kind of like cult status. Really, I think like, it's not quite had yet.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it makes more sense now we're living through an apparently unending economic depression than it did back in the mid noughties. It's got that going for it, but also I think I think that, the mainstream is just more ready for something like that. When you think about how like the defining hip hop artist of the 2000s was probably was like 50 Cent, or I know you're a big fan of early Kanye. I know I should be. I know it's probably objectively good, but God.
He
I
keeps trying to ruin everyone's memories of those
Yeah,
moments back.
but yeah, and now sort of from the mid 2010s, suddenly you have Kendrick Lamar in the mainstream, and the album
Hmm.
he like really broke through with To Pimp a Butterfly is kind of in the same spirit of what OutKast were doing here, of looking back at the history of black music and saying, how can we fuse this with hip hop? How can we point out commonalities between what people were saying back then and what people are saying now? I think it feels much less like a tough sell for an audience than it did in 2006.
Yeah, hopefully, and
Mm.
we've had like we've had some like really like iffy like movies since for musicians. So hopefully, like just by comparison, it's like good too. It's like okay, we underappreciated that.
Who
We've
who
had
would you
worse
say
since.
has who would you say has lowered the bar enough
I'll upset people if I
please
say
do.
too many
Yeah, it's
names.
what the podcast's about.
Well, I mean, you've obviously you got the really mainstream stuff like Jukebox, like Mamma Mia and
Mm.
Walking on Sunshine, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, we somehow failed to do a Walking on Sunshine episode, haven't we? How strange. I
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Not at all, because
I
I
mean,
forgot the film existed.
yeah. I mean, and with the Me Too era, like one of the plots in that is very awkward to watch, where this guy like harasses his woman, like whilst, whilst badly doing karaoke all the way through. And also, like I've previously did an episode with you on burlesque,
Oh, of
um,
course, yes.
and like which it similar pop star vehicle, but where we have to worship and adore the leads in it, and how and get annoyed that the talent's not being recognised sooner. So it's just like compared to things like that, this has set a much higher bar, I think.
That's very true. Yeah, I hadn't been thinking about that aspect of burlesque, but it's true, isn't it? For all I've said that Andre 3000 isn't entirely plausible as someone who might fail, like Christina Aguilera's character in Burlesque never has so much as a second where you're allowed to doubt her, and it it really makes her quite unsympathetic, being like aggressively flawless.
I mean, some of the direction in it's like really good. I'm just looking at my
Yeah.
notes, like there's some great like visual gags and little tricksy things. I mean, it's just like, is it when I know he's called Percival. I'll just keep calling him Andre 3000. He wakes up. There's
Oh,
like all his clocks on the wall that are like singing along to one of their songs.
yeah.
And like the amount of CGI money thrown at like such a unnecessary thing that isn't needed whatsoever. But it's great. It's just really fun. And like so there's a lot of like style like and verve to like the direction of some of the sequences they do, I think.
Mm. Yeah, I was looking at Brian Barber because he hadn't appeared on my radar, although obviously I have seen his OutKast videos, including for The Whole World, a song which I adore. I understand
Yeah.
why a lot of people find it weirdly off-putting, but I think it's just perfect. I adore it. Um, but yeah, he hasn't directed a film since. He apparently spent 50 grand doing a previs like presentation to get the job of directing X-Men Origins Wolverine, and he didn't get the job. And I find it hard to imagine that he could have done a worse job directing X-Men Origins
Oh my
Wolverine.
god. I mean, I'll totally derail your podcast. Like, my massive rant on that film.
I remember
Oh my god.
didn't you, with some of your friends, try a drinking game with it where you had to take a sip every time something dreadful happened.
Yeah, it's like, let's make him the most powerful guy in the world, and then loudly discuss how we're going to portray him immediately after he gets his superpowers. It's just like everything was a mess in that film. Everything. Um, yeah. I didn't think we'd end up at X Men, but yeah, how the hell couldn't he get that job? It would have been such a better movie. He'd been in charge of that.
It's really strange, and I think that it reminded me in a lot of ways of Hype Williams, when he directed Belly, which we did on the as a Patreon episode earlier in the year. And I would like to think that even if you hated that film, and the early reviews of it were stinging, but I would like to think that even if you hated that film, you would say, all right, there's talent there. It's well directed. If we get him on something with a bigger budget and a sturdier script, this could be great. But it never seems to happen. And part of me just wonders if it's because the people who tend to be in charge of movie studios just do not enjoy hip hop enough to understand what's great about these films.
You do get like some bands and music like I this is my theory anyway. Like happen to be in vogue at a certain point, and like
Mm.
then there'll be like bands who were great that people just forgotten about. I imagine it's the same with directors as well, where it's like, oh, they're
Yeah,
actually really good. We just forgot about them that they existed, or they weren't doing a current thing, or things got messy, or whatever.
I also think maybe in by the year mid 2000s, there's still probably that lingering stigma against music video directors that they just do like hack flashy stuff. Which is obviously like, yeah, there are some people who that's true of, and there are some people who it really isn't. I think for all the film is not perfect, this film feels like a real movie. And I mean, you can
Hmm.
see a cinephilia just from a lot of his music videos, but it's really palpable here.
Yeah, it is. I mean, some of the attempts to make it like a proper movie maybe feel a little forced. I don't know,
Mm.
but yeah, like the ambition and the successes the movie does have, they make it really worthwhile. I think.
When you look
Um,
at the big song and dance numbers in particular, you can tell this is someone who studied like Busby Berkeley and Gene Kelly and wants
yeah,
to put that theory into practice. I think it's far more than just, the standard way of shooting a dance number in a music video is just to cut it like hell and point the camera at someone's feet. And this isn't like that at all.
yeah, for sure. I mean, like the dance sequence during Bow Tie
Yeah.
is absolutely brilliant. And yeah, it's not just like cutting for the sake of it or sell over
Mm.
substance. It's like it works really well. It's committed to like the time period, and whilst
Yeah.
having hip hop elements on it, that's fine. It's just good music. And I've made some notes like yeah, there's some interesting like when there's a shot like there's a zoom shot on Percival after like dramatic events towards the end of the movie where the scenery behind like kind of warps like around him in like one shot as it zooms in on him.
Yeah.
Uh, it's just like really like clever little touches, but that aren't like over the top or overwhelm the story or like a flashy music video thing you'd like typically associate.
Yeah.
Um, I think like there's some quite good elements to the plot too. Like I wrote down that the scene with between Percival and his dad was excellent. That was a really interesting relationship. Um,
Yeah.
because even though his dad was holding him back from his like music dream or whatever, he's not necessarily. They show moments where he's not like a bad guy or anything. You see it from his perspective too.
Yeah. There's
And
a
them saying, "Well,
level
I
of
don't have anything to say to you. What would we talk about?" That kind of thing. That was really powerful. I thought. Um,
yeah, there's a level of nuance in that that you don't expect in a kind of loosely Star is Born kind of movie starring a pop band, is don't you?
Yeah. I mean, the scene with Big Boy in the car was weird though. Like that maybe lacked the nuance, but it's trying to be a powerful moment when he like a random family and like life lesson you need to learn now. But
I like how he has the sort of Greek chorus of kids, though, who, like, every time someone swears, they all put their hands over their ears in unison. Those are
yeah,
well-trained
that was
kids.
great.
For all he's not
That was
Father
really
of the
good.
Year, he's got them trained.
Yeah, no, that was really good. That was really good. Yeah, and to be fair, some of this praise we're giving the film is because like we're comparing it to like worse films.
Yeah,
But
I suppose I should note that I think that particularly the musical numbers look good when you compare it to something that is good. I should make that clear.
yeah, so it's not like it is genuinely good in several
Yeah,
areas too. Yeah, I agree with that. And just the other thing I wanted to say was even though like it's a very random selection of songs, it kind of what I like is that they're willing to add little touches to the songs. Like, this is the
yeah,
geeky side of me, but like they add like strings to a certain thing, or and they add like extra horn section, and to make it feel like more part of the movie, and just because they
yeah.
can, and like it's okay to do a slightly different version.
Yeah, I really like that as well. It reminded me of sometimes Edgar Wright does that a bit in Baby Driver. There's a very subtly different version of Ready Let's Go by Borders of Canada in that movie, which works really well. And yeah, like you, I think it just shows an attention to detail, doesn't it? It shows that someone cares about this stuff, which
Yeah,
is
it
great.
does. It does.
Yeah.
I mean, the "She Lives in My Lap" sequence is still a bit weird, like how they use that song in that like specific scene. But
Yeah.
I'm not going to criticize it though because it's stuck in my head ever since I first saw it, and it's such a great track.
Oh yeah,
And I get,
there's
yeah,
there's very few scenes in a movie like that, I would say. Like maybe David Cronenberg could do something with it. I don't
yeah.
know.
but but yeah, no, that works really well. I think it's just like and a lot of these things you can always say, oh, because the magical mystery to it, I can say that movie's like really weird and random, but the music's great. Like the
Yeah,
music videos are fantastic. This like the music is just uniformly great, but there's more to the movie than that you can genuinely enjoy as a film, which is a
yeah,
good praise. I'd argue.
yeah. I would agree. Any other notes before we
I kept
wind
writing
up?
down this. I kept writing down this music is awesome. This music kicks ass. This music is great, which isn't like very
Yeah,
like necessary comment, but the music is great.
the music is indeed great, and OutKast are great, and you know, for all it sucks that we're probably not going to get another OutKast album, I think Big Boy's solo albums are really underrated. And I mean, Andre 3000 still manages to guest on about 1 million singles every year. He's a busy man.
Yeah, I mean, if he does that first like he did on Frank Ocean's Blonde on
Yeah,
the solo track, if he does that every like few years, like that'll keep me happy. I think.
that astonishing guest vocal he did. There was a Gold Link song that leaked. Um, I forget what it's called. Love Third, I think it was called, with Andre 3000 and Steve Lacy. It was majestic and it got everyone really excited about his forthcoming album. And then people heard the actual album, which does not have Love Third on it. And everyone was like,
All
oh,
right.
well, what have you done there? Um, but that Love Third is a great song if you can still find it floating around anywhere. And of course, I just love that sometimes you just encounter him wandering around an airport playing jazz flute. Apparently, that's also a thing he does.
Yeah,
Yeah,
as you do. As long as he's happy and out there playing jazz flute somewhere, that's all I need to know.
also, if Andre 3000 is wandering around an airport playing jazz flute, all is right with the world.
Maybe that's a good place to end.
Perhaps, yes. If you enjoyed this podcast, you can donate to our Patreon at www.patreon.com/geek show, where, as we've mentioned before, you get bonus episodes like our one on Belly. Otherwise, please give us a like, give us a comment, share us to your friends, give us a review where you get your podcasts. That helps us out. But until a fortnight's time, when we'll be back with another free episode of Pop Screen, I've been Graham.
I've been Joe.
And that's your lot. Thank you for listening.